Welcome to day 17 of our 30 days of PM challenge, where we look at product management principles, talk about things a typical product management manager does as part of their job, and how they build and scale features to generate business value and to provide the right solutions to their customers, right? So, today we're looking at another such topic. The topic of discussion for today is actually storyboarding. I mean, when you think of storyboarding, you don't really think of product management. You mostly think about animations, think about movies, think about filmmaking in essence. But storyboarding can also be incorporated into product management, where the end goal might be different. For example, as a product manager, you are building apps, while as a filmmaker or someone, a digital artist, you are storyboarding scenes that are part of a film or a movie that you're creating. But eventually there is an end product that you're trying to achieve through storyboarding, and storyboarding is a process for you to lay down the pieces and put the pieces of the puzzle together for eventually getting to the end goal that you want. It can be a product as a PM that you're looking to build and get as an output, and as a user you are probably looking at uh, the feature to be available to you, right? And having that feature available to you through discovery and research from your PMs and users actually building the product, and the eventual consumers. The consumers might be consuming different things for different personas who use storyboarding, but the eventual goal is to provide something of value for an end user and a customer, right? So the topic for today for us is storyboarding, and how you can actually leverage the concept of storyboarding to build better products. So here, we will look at examples and references of how product management you actually utilizes storyboarding. It comes a lot of the times when you're doing product design, product and design thinking, and having sessions with your end customers to get insights of what their typical journey is. And the advantage of using storyboarding is your user is at the center of all you do. And with that, and as you define every scene or every step as part of your storyboard, you think about all the small details that are part of the problem, right? Yeah, if you don't for let's take an example of not using storyboarding, right? You probably have items in your head. You probably build a small mock-up for your high fidelity teams. The details probably get lost from what you have thought, what you have put on paper, and what that eventually gets developed into, right? So there are missing pieces along the way, but with the help of storytelling you can essentially focus and narrow down to even the smallest of details that need to be achieved to build a scalable and build a product that everyone eventually enjoys using. So, a very relevant example about storyboarding in the product management space is comes with a story from Airbnb and the founder and CEO, Brian Chesky, where he essentially was looking at resources from Disney and a storybook that he discovered that Walt Disney had, which had a lot of storyboards about their latest animation. I think it was related to Elsa and some of their animations. So yeah, this is how a typical storyboard looks. It gives all the scenes, it gives all the description, the dialogues that are available, and eventually explains how, for example, a scene needs to be portrayed, what action the users can perform and what are they performing, what is the background, and then how the actions for unfold over a series of steps, right? So we look at, as I was telling, the example of Airbnb and how on Christmas actually Brian Chesky found out about this biography of Walt Disney, which had Snow White and Seven Dwarfs and a comic book essentially with details of how they built the animation and the cartoon and they came up with that, right? So there's a beautiful story that you can read. The original source is over at here with Fast Company, and which explains about how Brian Chesky used that approach of storyboarding to essentially build frames and screens related to their Android app, and how that led to building the product scale in a scalable way, and how now storyboarding has even become a process of designing products at Airbnb and scaling that further, right? So it's a very helpful practice when you are doing design thinking, and if for example you are in a situation where your product is getting overhauled or having a redesign. So there will be multiple screens and multiple processes, steps, actions, UX elements that are probably getting updated, and storyboarding essentially puts everything on a large screen, and you can go through step by step process of how uh, an actual interaction happens from start till finish, right? And the advantage of storyboarding is you can go through each and every detail of the process and get through with what needs to be iterated and improved upon by the team, and that needs to get delivered. So this is one very relevant example on how storyboards were used at Airbnb. And the I mean, we also have references of how it helped with designing and delivering for user experiences from different perspectives, where the user persona and the user is at the center when looking at things, right? So for example, they built stories both for the host and also for the guest. So they had scenarios and situations laid out of how, for example, a host would get started with Airbnb, and also how the experience on the other side for a guest would be like, and how what steps need to probably be added for a specific persona, what needs to be reduced, and how the usability can be improved. I mean, by empathizing with the user persona and their situation and what they deal with to begin with. So that is how you can leverage user personas and build designs using storyboards that provide an entire coverage. So I also remember a similar story with an academy and their uh, mobile and design updates that they were planning. So what they essentially did was, within their hallway, I read this somewhere on Twitter from a few folks at an academy who mentioned they when they would, for example, building a new feature or overhauling an existing section of the platform within their application, they built screens that were, I mean, laid out in the hallway on a board, where any user looking at the series of screens and the series of actions, which were essentially storyboards talking of situations from start to finish, and the elements a user can interact with across their journey of using the application, and put down comments, right? After a period of time, once, because you are always you can always refer and go back even while grabbing coffee at the office, you can look at these elements and give your feedback in just some tiny clip notes, right? So this is one of the other processes that other companies and big organizations leverage, because eventually a lot of design thinking and product design is from the insights of users and how users behave and interact with your application on a screen or on a website or on a desktop, laptop, whatever that may be, right? So because the screens are different, the way of interacting is also different, the persona also changes. You want to build solutions that is actually useful and doesn't really hinder or does not have like a sharp learning curve to it, right? So UX and design becomes very important at this stage, and using storyboards and interacting with the elements that are involved and showcasing and going over the details helps build a greater product. So I think yesterday also in the design thinking stream, we looked at how Google essentially used and built their Google Maps platform for mobile and motor vehicle users, right? And how they iterated and what made sense for a particular geography to be added and how it needed to be delivered, such that it was the most straightforward for a user, not having to think a lot, but always going along the process and the journey to eventually use the application. So there are obviously examples a lot of the times when building storyboards. You have, you look at the user interfaces, you look at the user experiences and the interaction elements, but the best way to build these UI UX elements and, I mean, jot them down on a storyboard is defining the user persona, looking for the problem, defining a problem. If, for example, you have a new segment or a new section of platform to be introduced, you can set the goals that you are trying to achieve. What are the potential ways of achieving that, and brainstorming on ideas, building the ideas and the designs around a user persona, building the customer journey roadmaps, and making those as part of your storyboard, and having a typical flow from start to finish on what possible elements a user can interact with, and then From there, after the storyboards are defined, you can convert them into your wireframes and mockups for your engineering and design teams and your UI UX teams to take that up, build, and use it as references when iterating and building for new features and new additions within the product. So this is why these UI storyboard elements helps you to get down and define a very clean and clear process where the details are captured in meticulously, because everyone has the ability to look and experience and get an understanding of how the process would look like and how the end product eventually looks like, right, for a typical user trying to use the application. So these are a few things and steps you can keep in mind or when creating a storyboard, and you can use multiple tools online. You can use Miro, you can use Whimsical, you can use Balsamic, you can also use Figma, and then iterate and improve with your teams, right? And use the storyboards and as a platform or as a way to design thoughtful solutions, thoughtful products which have the user in mind when building them, and capture all the essential details for all your stakeholders involved. Also, it can be your design teams, it can be your customer success engineers who can understand how the eventual feature would look like, and this is essentially part of your product design cycle of building the product and thinking of ways to build the product and iterating over solutions and potential options to build, right? And there are also other resources that you can look at where we talk about how to use storyboards for product development. It also is a way to align all of your stakeholders to the same goal and making things clear and concise, where for example a lot of the time details get lost and across teams and their understanding of a specific section or functionality, where eventually the customer all they wanted was a swing on a tree, but everyone thought of their own way of building this, and this is where storyboards come into play and help understand to create what the situation actually is and how to solve for that situation by going over all the details possible. So yeah, this is another resource talking about a situation of how a problem was discovered and potential ways of solving it, and how, for example, user interacts with a specific product and how the UI UX elements look like. Here it's a lot more static. You see how the flow is when you click on a certain button, what action the user is perform can perform, the label of the storyboard on what it's describing, and some description around the action that can be performed and details about it, right? So this is how typical UI UX sort of storyboard goes when you're building products in the product space. And this is another similar example of how the flows and things flow around and connect over the steps that a user is performing. So a lot of time these are part of your UI UX screens where you create mockups and iterations of the approach for solving and reaching to a solution of implementing, for example, certain section of the platform, and how do you enable the users from start till finish and make it as seamless as possible. So the storyboard helps you envision the potential ways to do it, and also how to organize and portray and present the information eventually. And if you feel a few steps can be removed or can be added or improved, you do that through this process instead of having engineering already start and build mockups and investing a lot of time but not and it not performing up to the mark or to the standards you expected it to. So it's always helpful to document these details before in like a document or through these storyboarding platforms, and then get insights and feedbacks and iterate and improve to eventually freeze the details required, and then help your engineering teams build that as well. And this is similar reference of how Airbnb use storyboards to understand customer experiences, both on the two main personas that they deal with, right? They deal with guests and they deal with hosts. And how do you essentially build your application around these personas and understand what are their needs, uh, ideate on them, have ideas, discuss and brainstorm these ideas, prototype them after the storyboarding sessions where we are done of understanding the user requirements, prototype, test, build, and iterate and improve from there on, right? So this is another one of those references where these storyboards were a visual way to understand the customers better, right? uh, as opposed to having pointers within a document or spreadsheet listing down characters and details of a specific persona, going over like a real life comic book sort of step by step process of how the interaction actually happened and is for a specific persona and customer. You understand uh, with much more context, right, and much more I mean detail of what the user is actually going through. And it helps you imagine, and even the smallest of details that get catched, that gets prioritized, and get discussed and clarified, so that eventually when it comes to delivery, you don't have any sort of issues and everyone is aligned to build the product for that goal. So yeah, this was the original source where we referenced about Airbnb and Brian Chesky, understanding about getting understanding of storyboarding and how he could leverage and how he leveraged the same concept into product building and scaling the UI and interface of Airbnb's mobile app. But yeah, how to build these story maps? You have multiple resources like we talked, and you have multiple scenarios that you can discuss. You have multiple for a specific user persona, build storyboards explaining their situation, giving context to the storyboards, and also then looking at UI UX flows of interaction within the product, of solving that problem for the user, right? So these are another few resources that you can go do, and how you, for example, can go through step by step process of beginning the storyboard with defining the process, compiling all the data required, gathering your tools, and documenting details as I mean documenting all the details possible, and then iterating and building the final interfaces for your engineering team to take action upon. So yeah, I think that's mostly it about UI UX and how you can create these storyboards to essentially get context on the user, get context on the scenario, get into the details of how a scenario and a situation or a problem statement can be handled, and have all the steps documented with clarity, such that all your team members can interact, clarify, discuss, and build the best solution possible for the end user, right? So storyboarding is a very important part of design and product design in essence, and it eventually has a lot of value when you're, for example, building a new feature from scratch, or trying to uh, improve the existing interfaces of the product, right? So as your product grows, it's helpful to have these cycles with your design and engineering teams on having, for example, a V2 or the next version of how you would scale your design components from its existing stage and grow from there. So yeah, these are a few references. You can also look at our other live streams. We did one yesterday about ideating in the design thinking process, and we also covered design thinking as a whole concept of how this steps of empathizing, having the human and the user at the center is required, empathizing with the user, looking at defining the details, ideating over them, prototyping the details, and testing these scenarios for the user, right? And design thinking and storyboarding also fits into the same place and a category of thinking of problems and scaling them further. So yeah, that's been it about storyboarding. We'll see you tomorrow on another topic about product management and what a product manager typically does, and share a few resources and references along the way to help you guys understand product management. So yeah, that's been it. Talk to you soon. Talk to you tomorrow. Thank you.